How's life in DC nowadays?
Well, it's been a little bit of a difficult couple of months here in Washington. Obviously, with the insurrection at the Capitol on January 6th, a lot of things were shut down. China decided not to interfere in the 2020 election, despite these repeated warnings that we heard from the Trump administration, politicizing this intelligence to a narrative that was fitting for them.
Um, January 6th for me was a really, really dark day. And I think for many Americans, but certainly as a Washingtonian, I've lived here for 10 years and spent a lot of time in the Capitol building, both, giving testimony, briefing members of Congress, doing various events there. And also as a disinformation researcher. I think the thing that is most worrisome to me is not even the disinformation angle of all of this. It is the fact that the Capitol building and the Capitol complex, if you've not been, I think is pretty unique in that in all the other parliaments and government buildings I've visited around the world, you need, a clearance to get in, you need to be cleared, you need to be on the roll. You could just walk into the Capitol. You could walk into your senator's office or your congressperson's office on any day. And the fact that during a global pandemic, after a very clean and safe election, people felt the need to deface that building and levy threats against democratically elected lawmakers that didn't even represent them when they could have called up their representative on a normal day, a non-pandemic day, just walked into their office, which I'm sure many of the January 6th protesters didn't even know. That is the scariest thing. And it's something that we'll never get back here in the United States. Something that kind of transparency and openness that we stood for, I think is gone for a long time. And there's been a lot of discussion in Washington about, is the fence going to stay up? Is it down? It's down right now, but sometimes it comes back up. It's really saddening. And it's a visual example of the unfortunate reaction we've had to have just for the safety of the people who work on Capitol Hill. So that is one tangible reaction. Unfortunately, as Van already pointed out, Matt Gaetz and his ilk on January 6th, the evening of, had already started their disinformation campaign against the truth coming out about what had happened. We saw some representatives still vote to decertify the election that evening. And the Republicans on Capitol Hill have blocked a fulsome investigation into what has happened. There is a committee that exists, a special committee on January 6th. Some Republicans are cooperating with the investigation, including former Chief of Staff Mark Meadows. Steve Bannon is now being held in contempt of Congress for not cooperating. So we'll see what comes out of that. But with the division that exists on Capitol Hill, I do not think we will see a fulsome investigation. And frankly, it was disappointing to me to see the degree to which the second impeachment of President Trump was politicized. At that point, the Republican argument was, what is this going to achieve except divide us further? And I think the answer is it would set the record straight. It would set the truth straight and show what Congress stands for rather than just pandering to the electorate. The Senate. So I think the repercussions from January 6th, unfortunately, have been a further entrenchment of disinformation.
I think the disinformation environment domestically is really what is worrying me ahead of our November 3rd vote and the voting that's already happening today. We have, officials from the White House, including the president himself, spreading malign narratives about the safety of things like voting by mail, which is, necessary during the pandemic, number one. And number two, there's no evidence to the contrary that voting by mail is not safe and secure. So our adversaries are picking up on that messaging. They don't have to do that much in terms of creating content. All they have to do is amplify what's already coming from within the United States. And that was always the case to some extent, but we are making their job much, much easier and leaving ourselves more vulnerable to manipulation when our own politicians are not embracing the tenets of truth, basically. of weeks. They think they're part of the deep state, and they believe what the president tweets about the Russia investigation, et cetera, et cetera. And on top of all of that, we just have this rampant use of disinformation in our own political environment. And until we have that recognition from the very top of government that this is a priority, that this is a threat to our national security and the very foundations of our democracy, we can't really make progress on it unless we have that sea change. If we had a president who weren't using, the social media debate as a political football, as President Trump has been doing, with allegations of anti-conservative bias happening on the platform, I think we'd have a very different response from the social media companies.
In the coming days, what should people be on the lookout for in terms of disinformation that you believe is coming at us from these actors, whether they be foreign or domestic?
Well, I think there's going to be a lot of attempts to undermine the credibility of the voting process. And we've seen that already, the groundwork for that campaign being laid on the Republican side for months. I think foreign actors are definitely amplifying that sort of stuff. We've seen in overt Russian propaganda, they're echoing those messages. So just as you said at the top of the show, as we understand that this is going to be a longer process than it might normally be, that doesn't mean that the process is going wrong. That's just how it's going to work this year. And we need to have confidence that it will sort itself out. That doesn't mean necessarily that, the legitimacy of the election has been undermined. And we really need that context. And I think we've shown that we're capable of doing that with this whole Hunter Biden laptop saga, which we've been more circumspect about in reporting.
The emails don't need to be altered to be part of an influence campaign. Of course, they weren't altered. Voters deserve that context, not a fairy tale about a laptop repair shop. Of course, we know the only person in all of this telling a fairy tale is Ms. Jankowicz on social media repeatedly for days and days on end. Or here she is on February 17th of 2021 saying that the free speech versus censorship dichotomy is false and calling herself in a TikTok video the Mary Poppins of disinformation, where she sings that members of Congress shouldn't be permitted to spread misinformation on the floor, and otherwise taking to task those who propagate views she disagrees with. If your intent was to combat misinformation online or in the government, why on God's green earth would you nominate someone who is a human geyser of misinformation? Why did you choose her?
I bear responsibility for that. I understand that she is an expert in disinformation.
Yes, indeed, spreading it.